The Alberta NDP held a press conference today in Edmonton, and they introduced Private Members Bill 203. Now, there was a leader, Naheed Nenshi was there, and Nagwan Al-Guneid, who is the Shadow Minister for Energy and Minerals, she was there. And there are three things that the Private Members Bill will do. First of all, direct the government to establish a lot more utility scale battery storage on the power grid. That's a common thing these days in grids around the world. Number two, advance long duration storage research. So like batteries or some kind of storage that can go over 8 hours. And the third one is developing a made-in-Alberta battery supply chain. Now, this is an issue that I raised during the press conference and the technical briefing that came before it. So I've interviewed hundreds of experts over the last 5 years, 6 years, about battery storage and modernization of power grids, because battery storage isn't like something you do in isolation. It's part of a larger grid modernization that you do so that you can handle more electrification, more intermittent power generation from wind and solar. And this conversation that we had today during the press conference, I made the point that this is the kind of conversation we were having in 2020. You know, if I was talking to experts in the US or the EU, or we were talking about China and Asia, like this is behind the times. The conversations that I'm having now in 2025 are far, far more sophisticated and complex as countries grapple. I had an interview with energy economist Ed Hurst the other day, it was yesterday, in fact, about the Texas power grid. And they've got 14,000 gigawatts of battery storage, and they're adding as much as they can. Alberta has 190, and it hasn't added any for a little while. And if it has, it's been just a very little bit. I mean, Alberta is stagnant. It's not doing the things it needs to do to stabilize its grid, to modernize it, to build out power generation, because everywhere in the world, power demand is increasing. Next door in British Columbia, they're forecasting 2% growth, which is quite a bit. And that's still, critics are saying, what? Why not 3 or 4%? In Texas, you've got 14%. That's in 2026. That's how much power demand is going to grow, because of electrification and new factories and LNG exports and on all of that kind of stuff. In the US, it's 4 to 5% on average across the country. You're seeing the same thing. China is just even more than that, and even the EU, for particularly the industrial countries. So this is a problem. Even the conversation around power grids and electrification in Alberta, it's like walking into the last decade. And, you know, Alberta's gotten away with it so far because basically it's focused on oil and gas, and the grid sort of, it works. Haven't had outages yet, so there's not a lot of impetus to speed this up. Whereas in other jurisdictions, they're going hammers and tongs at it because they are under the gun. They're under heavy pressure for all the reasons I just mentioned. So here's what we're going to do. The press conference was mostly about battery storage. That's really all we talked about. So I'm going to play the clip. It's about 5 minutes long. It's Nenshi and Al-Guneid answering my questions that I asked during the press conference. And then after you're done that, I'll spend some time talking about the other two parts of the bill and explain to you why that's behind the times as well.
Naheed and Nagwan, thank you for taking my questions. I have a question and a follow-up. So I'm going to repeat a comment that I made during the technical briefing, which was that Alberta is, compared to other jurisdictions where I've done interviews, is very, very, very far behind. It's like having a 2020 conversation from 2020. And arguably this government is not very ambitious in terms of its grid modernization. However, I have to say, I don't find Bill 203, your private members bill, all that ambitious either. You maybe raise the discussion to a 2022 level. Why not? Why didn't you, or did you consider when you were drafting this bill being much more aggressive and trying to copy models that you see in Texas and California and the EU and even places like, Quebec? I mean, maybe you can just get us a little insight into your thinking there.
No, absolutely. Yes, there is so much ambition globally, and I wish we could have addressed every single thing in the electricity grid. As you know, there is the generation, transmission, and distribution, and the ancillary services in the grid. But there's so much chaos right now that what we're hearing from the industry, like we just cannot take more change. Also, you should know that the ISO is conducting more reviews next year on specifically these transmission fees that we're trying to address for a whole year. So that's more reviews, that's opening more reviews, and we're trying to meet this policy window of reviewing the energy storage fees. Historically, energy storage has been uh, hit twice with fees. So that makes it very uneconomic for many private investors. So the idea is just to try to meet this policy window before adding more change in different places in the electricity grid. Do you have anything to add?
No, I say no when I walk towards the mic. Thanks for that question, Markham. Look, we need to be so much more ambitious in our energy policy everywhere. This government, however, is just full of chaotic policy flip-flops. And we thought that with this private members bill, we could model, listen, even though you don't really know what you're doing, here is, if you like, some low-hanging fruit for us to be able to work on as a first step towards restoring industry confidence in the stability of Alberta's policy environment. So that was really the thinking here, just to give the government a chance to actually say yes for once. Now, they likely will not say yes, but we thought, hope springs eternal. We can at least show them a path forward with this bill. Do you have a follow-up, Markham?
I do actually.
Go ahead.
I noticed that in the, your comments, where the focus is on lowering costs and raising reliability for Alberta consumers. And hey, that's a good thing. Nobody's going to argue that that's a bad thing. But there's so much more these days as the world electrifies and the power grid becomes basically the foundation of 21st century economies.
Yeah.
You could have argued for, oh, hey, we're going to attract businesses that need low cost, reliable, clean electricity, for example. You could have, there's a whole lot of economic and industrial opportunities tied to grid modernization. And I'm wondering why you didn't address those in Bill 203 and just stuck to the consumer side.
Well, I think we did. We're trying to, it is complex stuff, as you well know, Markham. Your whole life is explaining complex things to folks, right? But at the end of the day, the bill before us does all of those things. We know that the economy is electrifying. Now, we can argue about the pace of that. We can argue about the adoption of EVs and so on and so on and so on. But we know that a stable electricity grid is a critical part of what we need to do. And as I said, that's why I'm back in politics. Because when I saw how the mismanagement of the grid and the ideological management of the grid led to brownouts, not just on the coldest day of the year in January 2024, we had a grid alert in April when it was, plus 9 degrees, showing that if we don't have stability of the grid, we don't have economic development, period. So there's 3 things that are important here. The first is affordability, because that's the most important thing on the minds of Albertans right now. The second is grid reliability, and that just doesn't mean that we're not going to have grid alerts on cold days for people's homes. It means reliability for business that wants to invest here. And the third is job creation. There's certainly investment in job creation in the building of the battery storage, but there are all kinds of knock-on ancillary effects, just as you highlight. So actually, you've given me some good advice, particularly on that third one. When we talk about job creation, we will now talk about some of the secondary impacts of that as well. Nagwan?
That's good.
All right. Thanks, Markham.
Okay, let's talk about advancing long duration storage research. Here's the problem. This has been going on for, 10, 15 years in other jurisdictions. So here at Energy Media, we've interviewed people about heat batteries, where you take cheap renewable energy during the day, you heat up maybe ceramic bricks, and then you find a way that when the electricity is needed, that you can exchange, use a heat exchanger and run it through a turbine, and you create electricity. Hydrostore out of Toronto digs these huge caverns down in California, and then uses cheap renewables to pump air into the cavern under pressure. And then when you need electricity, you release the pressure and the air comes out and turns a turbine, and you make electricity. And there's all sorts of long duration storage, flow batteries, and that are now up to 16 hours, and hydrogen. There's talk about using, again, cheap renewables to make green hydrogen stored underground in salt caverns in Alberta, and then when you need it, you let it out and you use that hydrogen in a modified gas power plant. And I've just scratched the surface of what's going on already. There is so much research going on in the storage arena, particularly around batteries, that there is no hope that Alberta is ever going to catch anybody. I mean, it's just not credible. It might be able to attract battery manufacturers and their supply chains to set up shop in Alberta so they can access the Canadian industry and maybe the Canadian market and maybe down into the U.S. market. But in my opinion, if the NDP are out to lunch, if they think that there is going to be any kind of a significant research push in this area, it's not a competitive advantage or comparative advantage. It's just not. Let others do that. They're already well down the road. Okay, the third thing, made-in-Alberta battery supply chain. This is a big deal because currently the battery, China absolutely dominates. Like when you saw a chart about how much China dominates each step in the battery supply chain, it's like 90%, 95%. So if you had a mineral, it might be lithium, it might be, who knows, whatever. But you needed it processed because you had a battery plant in Ontario, where Volkswagen's building one, you'd have to send it to China to get processed and then get it back. So there was under Joe Biden a big push to build a North American battery supply chain, but that kind of went by the by because of Donald Trump. But here's the thing: 3 years ago, I interviewed the Bloomberg NEF Mining and Minerals Vice President, Kwesi Mpofu. And Kwesi told me, because I asked him, I said, Alberta has lots of critical minerals. It could be the center for the supply chain, because what you do is you mine the minerals, you smelt and process them into metals, and then the metals go into cells, and the cells go into packs, and the packs go into either EVs or you put them on a power grid. And I said, it's got to be like a decade, right? Until Alberta is under any pressure to really get moving on this. And he said, no. He said 2 to 5 years. 2 to 5 years. And the reason is because other countries, it could be Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, wants to use its huge nickel resource to leverage a battery supply chain. And many of them are tied into China. And they want battery supply chains. And they're hungry. And they're moving at China speed to get all of this built. He said, if you've got 2 to 5 years, and after that, the supply chains at the global level are going to harden. The relationships will be built, and it'll be harder and harder and harder to get into that. Well, here we are 3 years down the road, and we're just starting to talk about it. Now, granted, Danielle Smith's UCP government has done some work in this area, fair enough, but they're not moving at light speed either. I mean, everybody's slow in this. And this is part of the problem. I mean, as somebody who talks to international experts half my time and reads, global studies and on electrification and where the energy system is going, I look back, when I pivot back to Canada and I see provinces like BC that are slowly beginning to pivot around, grow. They're anticipating 2% a year, growth in power demand. And critics are looking at that and going like, are you crazy? 3 to 5% is what everybody, Ontario is finally painfully making some steps. Quebec has been leading, no surprise. Manitoba's waking up, and Manitoba Hydro is starting to do some interesting work. But as a rule, Canada is just so far behind where other countries who are leading the energy transition and the evolution of this new global energy system. And Alberta is the furthest behind. And the sad part is Alberta's so far behind it doesn't know what's behind. All they talk about is oil and gas. Nobody ever talks publicly about the power grid. This is one of the few conversations, or unless, the government does something goofy like put on a renewables moratorium like it did last year. Otherwise, nobody talks about it. So this is a real problem. And the NDP, this is a good bill. There's nothing, I'd say there's nothing wrong with it. What I would say is that it moves the goalposts. Okay, so it advances the conversation, and the government's going to shoot it down because that's what this government does. And there's no way they're going to pass an NDP private members bill. And the reason I know that is because Nenshi said it. He doesn't expect it to pass either. So they're trying to advance the conversation, and that's a very good thing. But oh my God, you have no idea how Albertans, how far behind you are compared to the rest of the world, even compared to Texas, compared to California, compared to places like South Dakota are miles ahead of you. And this is not going to bite you tomorrow, but it's going to bite you in the very near future, because this is, as again, as the International Energy Agency said only last week, it's not that the age of electricity is coming. The age of electricity is here. And the foundation of the age of electricity is your power grid. And if your power grid doesn't have enough storage on it, if you're not making batteries locally, if you're not installing long duration storage, if you're not modernizing it with grid inverters and digital controls and all sorts of other things, you fall behind. This is essential infrastructure for the modern economy. That's, at the end of the day, that's it. And if Alberta wants to keep up, it needs to invest and it needs to get its act together, because what's clear from the conversation today is that it does not have its act together.